Hermione Granger checked her watch for the 4th time in 3 minutes. 9:42. They were precisely 3 minutes behind schedule. She tightened her grip on her daughter's small hand. The Diagon Alley Floo hub was an absolute disaster. It was the last Saturday before the Hogwarts term started, and it seemed every witch and wizard in Britain had chosen this exact moment to travel. The air was thick with the smell of sulphur and roasted nuts. People shoved past each other. Cauldrons clattered against stone floors. Owls screeched from their cages. "Mum, you're squeezing my fingers." "Sorry, Rosie," Hermione said. She loosened her grip just a fraction. She pulled a meticulously color-coded parchment from her pocket. She traced the bright red ink with her thumb. Flourish and blots at 10. Madame Malkin's at 11. Fortescue's at 12:15. It was a perfect plan. It left zero room for the current chaos of the Floo queue. "Can we get the ice cream first?" Rose asked. 12:15. Hermione said. She did not look up from the parchment. If she looked up, she would have to acknowledge the wall of sweating bodies pressing in from all sides. She hated crowds. She hated the unpredictable nature of massive gatherings. She preferred the parchment. The parchment made sense. "But I want chocolate now." We stick to the schedule. Schedules keep us safe. A wizard in a violent purple robe tripped over a stray trunk. He crashed into the person next to him. A domino effect rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted. A spark of rogue magic popped over the crowd, raining harmless blue sparks down on them. Hermione's heart picked up its pace. She hated losing control. "Hold on tight, Rose," she ordered. She didn't look down, but she felt the small hand wrap firmly around hers. Good. They were next in line. Just a few more minutes and they would be out of the hub. The Floo grate ahead of them flared. Not the usual pleasant emerald, but a bright, blinding, sickly green. The sound hit them a second later. A massive crack like thunder. Smoke poured from the grate, thick and choking. The crowd shrieked. A massive surge of bodies pushed backward, desperate to get away from the malfunction. Hermione was shoved hard against the rough brick wall. She threw her body over the small child at her side. She squeezed her eyes shut. She held onto that little hand like a lifeline, bracing for an impact that never came. The smoke smelled heavily of sulphur and old ash. People coughed. The panic started to settle. The Ministry transit officials were yelling for calm, their voices magically amplified over the din. Hermione opened her eyes. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her heart was beating entirely too fast. "Are you all right, Rose?" she asked. Her voice shook just a little. She looked down. The child holding her hand was not wearing a navy blue cardigan. The child was wearing perfectly tailored charcoal robes. The child did not have bushy brown curls. The child had hair so blonde it was almost white. Pale grey eyes met hers. They were perfectly calm. "I'm not Rose," the boy said. Hermione stopped breathing. The noise of the Floo hub vanished. The world went completely still. She looked at the small, aristocratic face. She knew that face. She saw that face in her nightmares during the war. "No," Hermione whispered. "I'm Scorpius." He said politely, "Do you have any chocolate frogs?" Hermione dropped his hand. She stumbled back a step. Her mind went entirely blank. Where was Rose? She spun around. The smoke was still clearing in the massive cavern. Witches were dusting off their robes. Wizards were shouting at the transit officials. There was no sign of a little girl in a navy cardigan. Panic, cold and sharp, hit her chest. Her hands stopped moving. Her voice died in her throat. She couldn't breathe. Rose. She tried to scream, but it came out as a harsh croak. She went that way, Scorpius said helpfully. He pointed a small finger toward the opposite end of the platform. Hermione didn't look. She was already pushing through the crowd. "Excuse me," she gasped. "Move. Please." Nobody moved. They were too busy complaining about the soot. "Rose." She yelled louder this time. The terror was completely unspooling her. She forgot her wand. She forgot magic. She just pushed. She shoved a tall wizard aside. Then she saw it. Through a gap in the crowd, a man was stalking toward her. He moved like water. The crowd seemed to part for him automatically, intimidated by the sheer hostility radiating from him. He wore a severe black suit. His pale hair was flawless despite the explosion. His jaw was set so tight it looked carved from marble. His left hand was shoved deep into his pocket. His right hand was firmly holding onto a little girl in a navy blue cardigan. Hermione's knees went weak. She pushed forward. She ignored the angry shouts of the people she shoved. She didn't care. Draco Malfoy stopped directly in front of her. He didn't look out of breath. He didn't look panicked. He looked utterly, flawlessly furious. "Mummy!" Rose chirped. She swung on Malfoy's hand like it was a playground ride. "This man has very soft hands." Malfoy dropped Rosie's hand immediately. He wiped his palm on his trousers. "Granger," he drawled. The word was a punctuation mark. It sliced through the noise of the crowd. Hermione grabbed Rose and pulled her tight against her legs. She dropped to her knees. She checked her over frantically. No burns. No soot. Perfect. She finally stood up and looked at Malfoy. "What did you do?" she demanded. Malfoy didn't blink. His grey eyes were like chips of ice. "I assure you, Granger," he said slowly. "I did not orchestrate a magical transit malfunction just to ruin your perfectly scheduled Tuesday." "It's Saturday, Malfoy," she snapped. The facts anchored her. The anger felt better than the terror. "Which you'd know if you had a modicum of situational awareness." Malfoy's mouth twitched. "My apologies. Your Saturday." Scorpius appeared beside his father. He tugged on Malfoy's suit jacket. "Father," Scorpius said. "She did not have any chocolate frogs." Malfoy looked down at his son. For a fraction of a second, the ice melted. His shoulders dropped. A deep, unsteady breath escaped him before he caught himself. "We'll get chocolate later, Scorpius," he said quietly. Hermione watched the exchange. She frowned. She had expected him to snap at the boy. Malfoy looked back at her. The ice was back instantly. "Explain to me," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register, "how my son ended up standing next to you." I don't know, Hermione said. There was an explosion. A surge. The magical field must have destabilized and swapped their positions based on proximity and mass. Proximity and mass, Malfoy repeated. It's a recognized phenomenon in overloaded transit nodes. So you're saying the Ministry is incompetent? I am saying accidents happen in crowds. Accidents. He sneered. My son could have been crushed. And my daughter could have been. Hermione stopped. She swallowed hard. The terror tried to claw its way back up her throat. She forced it down. She crossed her arms. She stood taller. They are both fine, she said briskly. The situation is resolved. Is it? Malfoy stepped closer. He was much taller than she remembered. He smelled like bergamot and expensive wool. He looked down at her with a look of pure disdain. We are currently standing in the middle of a disaster zone, he said softly. There are 3 Daily Prophet reporters currently interviewing that weeping hag over there. If they see us together, with our children, what do you think the headline will be tomorrow? Hermione froze. She turned her head. He was right. A woman with a quick quotes quill was rapidly scribbling notes while a man took flashes with a large camera. Ministry Golden Girl and disgraced heir in Floo hub disaster. Or worse. Secret meeting. Granger and Malfoy court with children. Her stomach turned over. The Ministry would have a fit. The paparazzi would swarm her house. Rose would be terrified. We need to leave, she said. Brilliant deduction, Granger. Your intellect remains unparalleled. Shut up, she hissed. The Floo network is down. The apparition wards around the hub have triggered because of the blast. We can't jump out. I am aware. We have to walk out through the alley. Malfoy looked toward the main exit. It was crammed with shouting people and frantic auras trying to establish a perimeter. Together? He asked. The disgust in his voice was palpable. Do you have a better idea? He looked at the reporters. He looked at the crowd. He looked down at Scorpius, who was currently showing Rose a small, silver snitch. The 2 children were completely unbothered by the chaos around them. His jaw clenched tight. No, he admitted. Hermione uncrossed her arms. She pulled her planner out again. She studied it, though the words were swimming. She needed a new plan. A new route. Something to get them out of this mess without ending up on the front page. Right, she snapped, snapping her planner shut. We find the transit official to log the incident, so we aren't fined for leaving a disaster zone. Then we use the side exit near the apothecary. You try to keep up. Malfoy's eyes narrowed. His hand twitched toward the wand pocket inside his jacket. I assure you, Granger, he drawled, his voice dipping into that infuriatingly smooth register. My legs are perfectly capable of matching your frantic scurrying. I don't scurry, she said hotly. You're scurrying right now. He pointed out. We haven't even moved and you're practically vibrating out of your sensible shoes. These shoes are practical for navigating a crisis. She shot back. Unlike your imported Italian leather, which is going to be ruined by the ash. Malfoy looked down at his shoes. A muscle feathered in his jaw. They are dragon hide. They repel ash. Now, Are we going to stand here debating footwear, or are we going to find this phantom transit official? Instead of hexing her, he smoothly reached down and took Scorpius's hand. "Lead the way, Granger," he said. They moved as a unit. It was completely unintentional, but they gravitated toward each other, forming a protective wedge around the two children. The crowd was still panicking. Witches were frantically searching for lost packages. An errant Kneasel hissed from atop a pile of spilled potion ingredients. Hermione kept her wand out, clearing a path with short, precise bursts of magic. Malfoy walked half a step behind her right shoulder. Whenever the crowd pressed too close, she felt the subtle shift of his body blocking the impact, taking the brunt of the shoving so she and the children wouldn't have to. He didn't say a word about it. She didn't thank him. "Transit official," Hermione muttered, scanning the smoky cavern. They usually wear high-visibility orange cloaks. "Do you see orange?" "I see soot," Malfoy said. "And panic. And what looks like a ministry intern crying into a clipboard. That's probably the official." Hermione altered her course. She aimed for the sobbing young man in the singed orange cloak. "Excuse me," she said brightly, shifting into her best ministry voice. "We need to log a transit anomaly." The intern looked up. His face was streaked with ash and tears. He took one look at Hermione Granger and Draco Malfoy standing side by side, holding each other's children, and his eyes rolled back in his head. He fainted dead away. Hermione stared at the unconscious intern. She looked at Malfoy. Malfoy raised a single, pale eyebrow. "Well," he said slowly, "your diplomatic skills certainly haven't lost their touch." Hermione let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. The absurdity of the situation finally cracked her rigid composure. "Oh, shut up, Malfoy," she whispered. "I believe we are technically fugitives now," he noted. "We are not fugitives. We just can't log the anomaly." "Fugitives," Scorpius repeated happily. "Are we going to prison, Father?" "Not today, Scorpius," Malfoy said. He glanced at the flashes of the cameras near the entrance. The reporters were moving closer. "Granger. The side exit. Now." Hermione didn't argue. She tightened her grip on Rosie's hand and practically dragged her toward the narrow, dark corridor that led to the apothecary alleyway. Malfoy stayed right behind her, his presence a solid, impenetrable wall between her and the chaos they were leaving behind. They burst out into the cool morning air of the side street. It was blessedly quiet. Hermione leaned against the brick wall, trying to catch her breath. The terror of the last 20 minutes was finally catching up to her. They were out. They had the kids. Now she just had to survive the rest of the day with Draco Malfoy. Part 2. The search. The side alley smelled of damp brick, crushed lacewing flies, and stale rain. It was blessedly, perfectly quiet compared to the disaster zone they had just escaped. Draco released Granger's arm. He hadn't consciously registered grabbing it in the first place. He wiped his hand on his trousers, though her sleeve had been perfectly clean. "Well," he drawled, adjusting his cuffs with precise, deliberate movements. "That was sufficiently humiliating. I look forward to reading all about my supposed secret alliance with the Ministry's pet in tomorrow's Prophet. I'm sure my mother will be thrilled." Granger ignored him completely. She was already pacing the length of the narrow alley. Her sensible shoes clicked aggressively against the cobblestones. She was muttering under her breath about transit protocols, emergency port keys, and ward failures. Her hands moved in frantic, choppy gestures, calculating contingencies for a situation that had already happened. Draco pinched the bridge of his nose. He could feel a migraine building directly behind his right eye. Granger, stop vibrating. You're giving me a headache. She spun on him. I'm not vibrating. I am recalculating. We have completely lost our window for flourish and blots, and if the wards are down, we can't apparate to the designated safe points. The entire day is ruined. Fascinating, Draco said flatly. Scorpius, please tell the minister in training that we are leaving. He turned around. Scorpius wasn't there. Draco blinked. He looked to his left. A stack of empty cauldrons sat abandoned by a back door. He looked to his right. A boarded-up window faced him. There was no blonde head. There was no navy blue cardigan. The silence in the alley suddenly felt very, very loud. Scorpius, Draco said. His voice was perfectly level. It betrayed absolutely nothing. Granger stopped pacing. What did you say? They're gone. Granger looked at him. Her brilliant, infuriating mind seemed to stall out completely. What do you mean, they're gone? They were right behind us. Clearly, they were not. Draco's chest tightened. A cold, sharp weight dropped directly into his stomach. Scorpius was 6. Scorpius was quiet, entirely too trusting, and prone to wandering off to examine anything shiny. Diagon Alley was currently a panicked mob scene full of terrified witches and wizards. He clamped down on the thwart. Panic was useless. Panic was sloppy. He strode past Granger, heading straight back toward the mouth of the alley. Where are you going? She gasped, scrambling after him. To find my son. Try to keep up. They burst back onto the main thoroughfare. The chaos hadn't subsided in the slightest. Witches and wizards were still swarming, trying to bypass the closed Floo hub. The noise hit them like a physical blow. Draco scanned the crowd. He looked for the flash of white blonde hair. Nothing. Just a sea of dark robes and pointed hats. Rose. Granger screamed. Her voice was roar. It ripped through the air, desperate and terrified. Draco flinched. He hated that sound. He hated the way it made his own carefully suppressed fear spike. Yelling isn't going to work, he said sharply. It's too loud. We have to find an aura, she said, spinning in a circle. They can lock down the street. They are too busy dealing with the Floo collapse. I am a senior ministry official, Malfoy. They will listen to me. She spotted a lime green bowler hat bobbing through the crowd. She took off at a sprint. Draco swore under his breath and followed her. He matched her frantic pace, weaving through the throng with practiced ease. He kept his hands in his pockets. He kept his face entirely blank. If anyone looked closely, they would see nothing but a wealthy man mildly inconvenienced by the crowds. They reached the aura. It was a young man, barely out of training, looking completely overwhelmed. You! Granger barked. The aura jumped. Madam Granger. Mum. The hub is closed, I know the hub is closed. She snapped. My daughter is missing. Rose Granger Weasley. She's with Scorpius Malfoy, I need a localized lockdown on this sector. The Auror blinked slowly. He looked from Granger to Draco, his eyes widening. Missing? But, ma'am, we don't have the personnel. The explosion. I am invoking Clause 4B of the emergency protocols, Granger said. Her voice was rising in pitch. She was talking too fast. You have the authority to seal the wards on the south end. I can't do that without authorization from the head office, the Auror stammered. Granger stepped closer to him. Her hands were balled into fists. I am the head office. Please, there are injured people inside. Draco watched Granger. She was starting to spiral. Her breathing was too shallow. She was reciting regulations like a shield, but the Auror wasn't listening. The crowd was pressing in tighter around them, pushing against Draco's back. Granger opened her mouth to yell again. Her hands were shaking violently. Draco stepped in front of her. He moved smoothly, cutting off her line of sight to the Auror. He squared his shoulders, placing his body between Granger and the crushing weight of the crowd. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough that she had to step back, out of the immediate flow of traffic. Useless, Draco said softly to the Auror. He didn't wait for a response. He grabbed the fabric of Granger's sleeve, just the fabric, and pulled her into the alcove of the nearest shop. It was Mole Pepper's apothecary. What are you doing? Granger demanded. She ripped her arm away. He was going to lock the street. He was going to wet himself and write a report, Draco corrected. Bureaucracy is too slow, Granger. We don't have time for your forms. He turned to the shop counter. The owner, an old wizard with a glass eye, was watching them suspiciously. Draco stepped up to the counter. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a heavy velvet pouch. He dropped it onto the wood. It landed with a very solid, very expensive thud. 2 children, Draco said. His voice was smooth, quiet, and absolutely terrifying. One with hair like mine. One with bushy brown hair. They walked past this shop in the last 5 minutes. The shopkeeper eyed the gold. He looked at Draco. I didn't see anything. The old man grunted. Draco's jaw tightened. The muscle feathered violently under his skin. He leaned across the counter. He placed both hands flat on the wood. He didn't blink. Let me be perfectly clear, Draco said, his voice dropping to a whisper. If anything happens to my son while you play games, the gold on this counter will be a fraction of what I spend to dismantle your life. Now, where did they go? The shopkeeper swallowed hard. His glass eye whirred. South, the old man croaked. Toward Fortescue's. The blonde one was talking about ice cream. Draco straightened up instantly. The terrifying aura vanished, replaced by smooth indifference. A pleasure doing business with you. He drawled. He turned on his heel and walked out the door. Granger hurried after him. The crowd outside was still thick, but they moved with a singular, shared purpose now. South. Fortescue's. Draco set a brutal pace. He needed to find Scorpius. He needed to know his son was safe. The fear was a living thing in his chest now, clawing at his ribs, but he kept it locked down tight. He glanced sideways at Granger. She was practically running to keep up. You can't just do that, she hissed as they dodged a group of haggling hags. Do what? throw gold at people and threaten them. I just did, Draco said. And it worked. Would you rather we were still back there watching you fill out form for B? It's about the principal. Your principals won't find our children. My gold will. You think money solves everything, she shot back. That's probably why your son thinks he can just wander off whenever he likes. Draco stopped walking. Granger took 2 more steps before she realized he wasn't beside her. She turned around. My son, Draco said, his voice dangerously quiet, is impeccably behaved. If anyone instigated a joyride, it was likely your heavily overscheduled daughter finally snapping and making a break for freedom. Granger's face flushed red. Rose is perfectly happy with her schedule. She asked for ice cream, Draco countered, crossing his arms. You denied her ice cream. Now they are marching to Fortescue's. I would say the evidence strongly supports my theory. She opened her mouth to argue, but the words died. Her shoulders slumped. The fire drained out of her completely. Draco watched the fight leave her. He expected to feel victorious. Instead, he just felt tired. She turned away, looking blankly down the street. Her hands were still trembling. Draco looked away. He didn't want to see the cracks in her perfect armor. It made her too human. It made her too much like him. He started walking again. He deliberately shortened his stride. He didn't stop to wait for her. He didn't offer a platitude. He just slowed his pace by a fraction of a second, just enough for her to catch her breath and fall and step beside him without having to ask. They walked in silence for a block. The crowd thinned out slightly as they moved away from the Floo hub. Thank you, Granger whispered. Her voice was so quiet Draco almost didn't hear it over the noise of the street. He kept his eyes fixed forward. He shoved his hands deeper into his pockets. Don't get used to it, Granger, he said. He felt her look at him. He could almost hear her intelligence working, analyzing the moment, dissecting his words. He hated being analyzed. He hated being seen. You terrified that man, she said finally. I incentivized him. You threatened to dismantle his life. I am a Malfoy, Draco drawled, slipping easily into the familiar, cynical mask. It's expected. I wouldn't want to disappoint the public. Granger let out a small, breathless sound. It wasn't quite a laugh, but it wasn't a sob either. Right, she said. Of course. Are you going to start lecturing me on ethics now? He asked. Because I feel I should warn you, I have an extraordinarily short attention span for moralizing. No, she said softly. I'm not going to lecture you. Draco frowned. He looked at her again. The frantic, bossy ministry official had vanished. What was left was startlingly fragile, stripped of all pretense. I was going to say, Granger continued, her voice remarkably steady despite the tremor in her hands, that it was highly effective. And I appreciate it. Draco swallowed hard. The sudden constriction in his chest had nothing to do with Scorpius this time. She looked up at him. The usual fire in her eyes was replaced by something entirely different. Grudging. Real. As I said, he muttered, looking quickly away. Don't get used to it. They turned the corner. The bright, striped awning of Florane Fortescue's ice cream parlor came into view at the end of the street. Draco felt a surge of adrenaline. They were close. "Come on," he said, picking up the pace again. He didn't look back to see if she was following. He knew she was right beside him. Part 3. The Broom Closet. The bell above the door to Florine Fortescue's ice cream parlor chimed cheerfully in the distance. Hermione's heart hammered against her ribs. Every step toward the shop felt like walking through molasses. The fear had bypassed logic entirely and settled directly into her bones. What if they weren't there? What if the shopkeeper had lied? What if, well, if it isn't the Ministry's brightest little star, looking rather less than polished? The voice sliced through the noise of the street. It was falsely sweet, dripping with venom and opportunistic delight. Hermione froze. She knew that voice. Everyone in magical Britain knew that voice. She turned her head. 30 feet away, emerging from an apothecary across the street, was Rita Skeeter. She was wearing a violently magenta robe. Her acid green quick-quotes quill was already hovering next to a floating piece of parchment. Rita hadn't seen Malfoy yet. Her predatory gaze was locked entirely on Hermione. "Madam Granger," Rita trilled, clicking her way across the cobblestones on aggressively high heels. "What a surprise to find you in the thick of the chaos. And where is the lovely little Rose today? Surely not abandoned in the panic?" Hermione's blood ran cold. If Rita saw her. If Rita realized she had lost her daughter. If Rita saw her with Draco Malfoy. The career-ending headlines flashed before her eyes. But worse, much worse, was the thought of Rose's face plastered across the prophet. The thought of the Ministry questioning her fitness. The thought of failing, publicly and irreversibly. She couldn't breathe. The air in her lungs felt like glass. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on her wrist. The grip was iron-hard but surprisingly careful. Before Hermione could even gasp, Draco pulled her backward. He didn't hesitate. He yanked her into the narrow, recessed doorway of the shop behind them. He fumbled with the handle for a fraction of a second, his magic flaring hot and wordless against the lock. The door gave way. He pulled her inside and shoved the door shut behind them, plunging them into near-total darkness. Hermione stumbled. She hit something made of wood. A mop handle clattered against a tin bucket. The smell of bleach and lemon cleaner was overwhelming. It was a supply closet. It was no larger than a telephone box. "Quiet!" Draco hissed. He was standing right in front of her. There was nowhere else for him to go. His chest was barely an inch from hers. She could feel the rapid, unsteady rise and fall of his breathing in the dark. Outside the thin wooden door, the clicking of Rita's heels grew louder. "Madam Granger?" Rita's voice drifted through the slats in the wood. It sounded dangerously close. "Where did you run off to, dear? I have a few questions about the Floo network budget." Hermione stopped moving completely. She didn't reach for her wand. She didn't adjust her posture. She went perfectly, unnaturally still. The frantic, bossy energy that defined her evaporated. This was her tell. When she was annoyed, she vibrated. When she was truly, fundamentally terrified, she turned to stone. Malfoy noticed immediately. In the dim light filtering through the cracks, she saw his eyes lock onto hers. The irritation in his expression vanished. "Granger," he whispered, so quietly it was barely a breath of air. Hermione couldn't answer him. Her throat was closed. The darkness of the closet was pressing in on her. The smell of the bleach was making her sick. She was a terrible mother. The thought arrived with the force of a physical blow. She was a terrible, incompetent mother. She had planned the entire day down to the minute. She had color-coded the parchment. She had done everything right. And she had still lost her. I heard voices over here. Rita's voice echoed. The clicking heels stopped directly outside the closet door. Hermione closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't try to wipe it away. She couldn't move her hands. Suddenly, Malfoy shifted. He moved closer, eliminating the final inch of space between them. He raised his hand. His knuckles brushed against her cheek, catching the tear before it could fall. Hermione's eyes flew open. His hand was warm. It was solid. It was remarkably gentle for a man who seemed entirely made of sharp edges. "Breathe," he mouthed. She couldn't. "My photographer is arriving any second." Rita's voice complained to someone outside. "Find her. The minister's pet doesn't just vanish into thin air. There's a story here. I can smell it." Hermione squeezed her eyes shut again. The panic was drowning her. Malfoy's hand slid from her cheek to her shoulder. He gripped it firmly. "You're not failing, Granger," he said. His voice lacked its usual drawl. It was stripped bare, low and urgent. Hermione shook her head frantically in the dark. "I lost her," she mouthed back. "No." Malfoy whispered. "We got separated in a riot. There is a difference. I should have held on tighter." "You were holding on as tight as you could," he said. He moved his other hand, tentatively touching her other shoulder. He was anchoring her. He was the only solid thing in a world that was spinning out of control. "I thought," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thudding of her own heart. "I thought if I planned everything perfectly, nothing could go wrong." Malfoy let out a slow, quiet breath. "Nothing is perfect, Granger. I have to be." "No," he said fiercely. "You don't." The clicking heels outside the door finally began to recede. Rita was moving down the alley, her voice fading into the general noise of the street. They were safe from the press, but they were still trapped in the closet. Hermione finally let out a ragged breath. The tension drained out of her all at once, leaving her weak and trembling. She slumped forward slightly. Malfoy didn't let go. He caught her weight. "I don't know what I'm doing," she confessed to the darkness. The words tasted like ash. She had never admitted it to anyone. Not to Harry. Not to Ron. Certainly not to the press. "I'm doing it all alone, and I am constantly terrified I'm going to ruin her." Malfoy was quiet for a long moment. "I am terrified every single day," he said finally. Hermione looked up. The dim light caught the sharp angle of his jaw. The aristocratic sneer was completely gone. He looked exhausted. He looked human. "Scorpius is..." Malfoy stopped. He swallowed hard. "He is too good. He doesn't have the malice they expect from a Malfoy. And I spend every waking moment terrified that my name is going to ruin him before he even gets a chance to try." Hermione stared at him. They had spent their entire lives on opposite sides of a war. They had spent the last decade ignoring each other at ministry functions. They had spent the morning trading insults. But right now, in the dark, smelling of lemon cleaner and fear, they were exactly the same. "You're not ruining him," Hermione said softly. He asked politely for a chocolate frog in the middle of a disaster zone. "You're raising a gentleman." A ghost of a smile touched the corner of Malfoy's mouth. "He is rather polite, isn't he?" "He's wonderful." "Your daughter," Malfoy said, his voice dropping another octave, "is entirely fearless." She treated the explosion like a particularly boring theatrical performance. "She's too brave for her own good," Hermione admitted. "She gets it from her mother." The words hung in the cramped space between them. Hermione's breath hitched. The adrenaline crash was fading, replaced by something entirely different. She became acutely aware of how small the closet was. She was aware of the heat radiating from his chest. She was aware of the smell of bergamot, clean sweat, and expensive wool. He was so close. Malfoy's eyes darkened. The grey turned to slate. He looked down at her mouth. Hermione didn't pull away. She didn't want to pull away. The frantic need for control was gone, burned away by the panic and the strange, quiet intimacy of the confession. His thumb moved, tracing the line of her collarbone over the fabric of her coat. The touch was agonizingly slow. It sent a shock of heat straight through her nervous system. "Malfoy," she whispered. She didn't know if it was a warning or an invitation. He leaned in. The air in the closet felt charged, heavy with static. Then, a loud crash echoed from the street outside. Someone yelled. Glass shattered. The spell broke instantly. Hermione jumped back, hitting the shelves. A box of powdered soap fell over, dusting her shoulder in white. Malfoy stepped back, hitting the opposite wall. The cold, impenetrable mask slammed back into place so fast it was almost dizzying. "Right," he said briskly, clearing his throat. He adjusted his cuffs again. "Skeeter appears to have moved on. We should go before someone decides to clean the floors." Hermione nodded frantically. She brushed the soap off her shoulder, her hands shaking for an entirely new reason. "Yes," she managed to say. "Fortescue's. The children." Malfoy reached behind him and pushed the door open. The bright, chaotic light of Diagon Alley flooded into the closet, blinding them both. He stepped out first. He didn't look back to see if she was following. Hermione took a deep breath of the soot-filled air. It did nothing to calm her racing heart. She stepped out of the closet and followed him toward the ice cream parlor. Everything had just changed, and she had absolutely no idea what to do about it. Part 4. Found the sunlight hitting Diagon Alley was offensively bright after the pitch black of the supply closet. Draco stood on the cobblestones, blinking against the glare. The air smelled of roasted nuts and soot, a sharp contrast to the overwhelming scent of lemon cleaner and terror they had just left behind. He didn't look back at Granger. He didn't trust himself to look at her. His right hand still tingled where he had touched her shoulder. The memory of how she had felt fragile, trembling, completely unspooled was burned into his nervous system. He had spent 10 years building a fortress around himself, meticulously constructing a cynical, untouchable exterior. It had taken Granger exactly 20 minutes to break through it. "Fortescue's," Granger said. Her voice was raspy, but the frantic edge was gone. Draco nodded once, sharply. Fortescue's. He set a brisk pace down the street. The crowd was much thinner here. The panic from the Floo hub hadn't reached this far down the alley. Witches were browsing potion ingredients. Wizards were drinking coffee at small iron tables. The normalcy of it felt surreal. They reached the ice cream parlor. The bright pink and white striped awning fluttered innocently in the breeze. Draco stopped dead in his tracks. Through the large, magically reinforced front window, he saw them. Scorpius and the Weasley girl were sitting in a bright yellow booth. They were not crying. They were not panicked. They were not surrounded by dark wizards or rabid reporters. They were eating the largest, most obnoxiously colourful ice cream sundaes Draco had ever seen in his life. Granger slammed into his back. She had been walking too close, her eyes fixed on the pavement. Malfoy, what? She stopped. She followed his gaze through the window. A choked, desperate sound escaped her throat. She didn't wait for him. She shoved the door open so hard the bell above it nearly detached from its hinges. Draco followed her inside. The sweet, sugary air of the shop hit him like a physical wall. Rose. Granger crossed the shop in 3 strides. She threw her arms around the little girl, burying her face in the bushy brown hair. She didn't care about the sticky ice cream. She didn't care about the sticky table. She just held on. Draco walked slower. His legs felt strangely heavy. Scorpius looked up from his sundae. A dollop of blue ice cream was smeared across his nose. He looked at Draco, then looked at the spoon in his hand, as if assessing whether he was about to be reprimanded for poor table manners. Farther, Scorpius said politely, "We found the ice cream." Draco stopped at the edge of the booth. He looked down at his son. The tight, icy knot that had been sitting in his chest for the last hour finally dissolved. He reached out and placed a hand on top of Scorpius's white blonde hair. He didn't say anything. He just let his hand rest there, grounding himself, making absolutely sure the boy was real. "I told him you would find us," Rose mumbled into her mother's shoulder. "I said my mum has a schedule, and she always finds everything." Granger pulled back. She was crying openly now, but she was smiling. She wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve, completely ignoring decorum. "Rose," she said, her voice shaking. "You can't just walk away in a crowd. Do you have any idea how terrified I was?" "It was very loud," Rose explained simply, taking a massive bite of a strawberry wafer. "And it smelled bad. Scorpius said he wanted chocolate. And you said we were going to get ice cream at 12:15. So we just went to get it." Granger looked at her daughter. The terrifying, undeniable logic of a 7-year-old. She looked up at Draco. Draco raised an eyebrow. "As I said," he drawled, finding his footing again. "Your overscheduled daughter instigated a joyride." "I did not instigate," Rose corrected him, pointing her spoon at him. "It was a mutual decision." Scorpius nodded solemnly in agreement. It was mutual. But she knew the way. Granger let out a laugh that sounded suspiciously like a sob. She collapsed into the booth next to Rose, resting her forehead on the sticky table for a long, shuddering moment. Draco slid into the booth opposite them, next to Scorpius. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and began meticulously wiping the blue ice cream off his son's nose. They sat there for 10 minutes, Nobody spoke. The children happily demolished their sundaes. Draco watched Granger breathe. He watched the tension slowly bleed out of her shoulders. The frantic ministry official was gone, replaced by a mother who was simply, profoundly relieved. Eventually, the sundaes were gone. "We should go," Granger said quietly. She didn't look at him. "The Aurors will have cleared the side wards by now. I need to get her home." Draco's jaw tightened. This was the moment. The crisis was over. The adrenaline was fading. The strange, terrifying intimacy of the Broom Closet was rapidly evaporating in the bright sunlight of the ice cream parlor. They had no excuse to stay together anymore. "Right," Draco said. His voice sounded hollow, even to his own ears. They stood up. They paid the proprietor. They walked out onto the street. The silence between them was thick and heavy. It wasn't the comfortable silence of the side alley, and it wasn't the charged silence of the closet. It was the awkward, stumbling silence of two people who had revealed entirely too much and didn't know how to put the armor back on. Draco looked down at Granger. She was aggressively avoiding his gaze. She was adjusting her coat. She was tucking a stray curl behind her ear. She was preparing to leave. "I suppose this means you'll have to redraw your entire afternoon itinerary," Draco drawled. He tried to inject the usual bite into the words, but his eyes were too warm, and his voice was too soft. Granger finally looked up at him. Her mouth twitched. "I'll manage," she said. She took a step back. The distance between them grew. Draco felt a sudden, irrational spike of panic. It was different from the fear of losing Scorpius. This was the fear of something else entirely slipping through his fingers. He opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. What was he supposed to say? "Don't go. Stay. Tell me more about how terrified you are." "Scorpius," Rose said suddenly. The two adults froze. Rose was holding Scorpius's hand. She looked up at her mother with wide, entirely unrepentant eyes. "Can Scorpius come over for a playdate?" Rose asked. "He has a very cool silver snitch, and I want to show him my books." Granger blinked. She looked from Rose to Scorpius. She looked at the small hands clasped together between them. "Rose, I don't think." "I would like to see the books," Scorpius said. He looked up at Draco. "May I, Father?" Draco looked at his son. Then he looked at Granger. The trap had been sprung. The children had expertly, flawlessly cornered them. Granger looked absolutely terrified again. But this time, she didn't turn to stone. She looked at Draco, and he saw the exact same panic reflected in her eyes that he felt in his own chest. They were standing on a precipice. The safe option was to walk away. The safe option was to blame the chaos, thank him formally for his assistance, and go back to ignoring each other for the next 10 years. Draco looked at her mouth. He remembered the smell of the lemon cleaner. He remembered the heat of her shoulder under his hand. He stepped forward, closing the distance she had just created. "Stay," Draco said. The word slipped out before he could stop it. It wasn't a drawl. It wasn't a demand. It was a request, plain and unshielded. Granger's hands stilled on the fabric. She stopped adjusting her coat. She stopped moving entirely. "It's past 1 o'clock, Draco continued, his voice dropping slightly. Your schedule is in ruins. The leaky cauldron is far too crowded today, and the children clearly require supervision before they orchestrate another international incident. He shoved his hands into his pockets to hide the fact that they were shaking. Have lunch with us, Granger. She met his gaze for a long, breathless moment. The street around them seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, standing in the sunlight, completely stripped of their defenses. Then, slowly, that familiar, brilliant smile broke across her face. It reached all the way to her eyes. It was the most beautiful thing Draco had seen in his entire life. "All right, Malfoy," she said softly. "Just lunch." Part 5. The lunch date. Hermione had survived a war, revolutionized the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and once successfully negotiated a treaty with a clan of particularly hostile centaurs. None of it prepared her for the sheer, unadulterated panic of walking down Diagon Alley on a Saturday afternoon with Draco Malfoy. The leaky cauldron is out, Malfoy had said smoothly, taking control of the situation before she could rethink her answer. It's entirely too loud. There's a private terrace at the back of the Gilded Griffin. They know me. So now they were walking to the Gilded Griffin. Hermione kept her hands shoved deep into her coat pockets. Her heart was beating an erratic, unsteady rhythm against her ribs. Every time Malfoy's shoulder brushed hers in the crowd, a jolt of heat shot straight up her arm, entirely bypassing her brain. She was acutely, painfully aware of him. Up ahead, Rose and Scorpius were walking side by side, entirely unaffected by the sudden tectonic shift in their parents' dynamic. Rose was gesturing wildly, clearly explaining the plot of a book. Scorpius was listening with the solemn, rapt attention of a tiny philosopher. They seemed to have recovered nicely, Malfoy murmured. His voice was pitched low, meant only for her. It sent a shiver down the back of her neck. Hermione cleared her throat. Children are remarkably resilient. Unlike us. She looked up at him. The aristocratic mask was back in place for the public, but the grey eyes looking down at her were entirely too warm. I am perfectly resilient, she said, lifting her chin. Of course you are, Granger. You just look like you're walking to the gallows rather than a lunch date. It is not a date. A play date, then. His mouth twitched. For the children. The Gilded Griffin was discreetly tucked behind a high stone wall at the edge of the alley. As Malfoy had promised, the maître d' recognized him instantly. Within 2 minutes, they were seated at a quiet, sunlit table on a private terrace, completely shielded from the chaos of the main street by thick, climbing ivy. It was entirely too intimate. Hermione picked up her menu. She looked at the moving text without reading a single word. I recommend the roasted pheasant. Malfoy said lazily, leaning back in his chair. And perhaps a calming draught for the lady. I don't need a calming draught. Mum, your face is red, Rose pointed out unhelpfully. She reached across the table and patted Hermione's hand. Are you getting a fever? Malfoy let out a short, quiet laugh. Hermione shot him a withering glare over the top of her menu. I'm perfectly fine, Rosie. It's just warm in here. It's outside. Rose countered. It's a very warm breeze, Hermione said firmly. Scorpius looked from Rose to Hermione, and then to his father. My father's ears are red, too. Malfoy's laugh cut off abruptly. He cleared his throat and picked up his water glass. The breeze. He confirmed smoothly, though he aggressively avoided Hermione's gaze. "Very warm today." Hermione bit the inside of her cheek to stop herself from smiling. The sheer, absurd comedy of the situation was starting to override her panic. They ordered. The food arrived quickly. For the first 15 minutes, the conversation was dominated entirely by the children. Rose interrogated Scorpius about his toy broomstick. Scorpius politely asked Rose about her favorite subjects at primary school. Hermione watched them, mesmerized by how easy it was for them. They didn't carry the scars of a war. They didn't care about the history between the Granger Weasleys and the Malfoys. They just liked each other. "He really is wonderful," Hermione said softly, watching Scorpius meticulously cut his carrots into perfectly even squares. Malfoy paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at his son, the guarded expression melting into something painfully tender. "He's the only good thing I've ever done," Malfoy said. The honesty in his voice was staggering. It was the same raw vulnerability he had shown in the Broom Closet, laid bare in the bright afternoon sun. "Don't say that," Hermione said, her voice fiercely quiet. "It's the truth." "It isn't. People can change, Malfoy. You have." He looked at her. The grey eyes were searching her face, looking for pity or condescension. He found neither. "Have I?" he asked quietly. "You're sitting at a table with me," she pointed out. 10 years ago, you would have rather eaten glass." A genuine, startlingly bright smile broke across his face. It erased the sharp lines of his jaw and made him look impossibly young. 10 years ago. He countered, "You would have punched me in the face before sitting down." It was a very good punch. It was a lucky shot. "I broke your nose, Malfoy." "A minor fracture," he corrected, though he was still smiling. And entirely unprovoked. "You called me," she stopped. The word was too heavy for this sunlit terrace. "I know what I called you," he said. The smile faded, replaced by something deep and heavy with regret. "I was a coward, Granger. And a fool. And I have spent a very long time hoping I would eventually get the chance to tell you that." Hermione stopped breathing. The air between them crackled with an electric, undeniable current. The noise of the children chattering faded into the background. He was looking at her as if she was the only person in the world. She realized, with a sudden jolt of terror, that she wasn't just tolerating him. She wasn't just making the best of a bad situation. She actually liked him. She liked the sharp edge of his wit. She liked the quiet, fierce way he protected his son. She liked the way he looked in that ridiculously expensive suit. And that meant she was in so much trouble. "You don't take sugar in your tea, do you?" Malfoy asked suddenly, gesturing to the teapot the waiter had just set down. Hermione blinked, startled by the shift in topic. "No, I don't." "I remembered," he said simply. He poured the tea, adding a splash of milk to hers before handing her the cup. He remembered. From 10 years ago. From brief, hostile glances across the great hall at breakfast. He had been paying attention even then. Hermione took the cup. Her fingers brushed against his. The shock of heat was immediate, spreading from her fingertips all the way to her chest. "Thank you," she managed to say. The rest of the lunch passed in a blur of charged glances and careful, probing conversation. They talked about their jobs. They talked about ministry politics. They argued over a recent piece of legislation, trading rapid-fire points until Rose loudly announced she was bored. By the time the bill arrived, Hermione felt as though she had run a marathon. Malfoy paid before she could even reach for her purse. He ignored her protests with a smooth wave of his hand. They walked out of the Gilded Griffin and back onto the street. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long, golden shadows across the cobblestones. The playdate was over. Hermione stopped near the apparition point. She gathered Rose's coat, stalling for time. She didn't want to leave. "Well," Malfoy said. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking entirely too comfortable. "That was vastly less disastrous than I anticipated." "High praise," she noted, trying for her usual bossy tone. "It fell flat." "I aim to please." He looked down at Scorpius. "Say goodbye to Rose, Scorpius." Scorpius turned to Rose. "Goodbye, Rose. I enjoyed the ice cream and the pheasant." "Goodbye," Rose said. She looked up at Hermione. "Can we see him tomorrow?" Hermione laughed, a slightly breathless sound. "Not tomorrow, Rosie. People have things to do. Next weekend, then." Malfoy said. Hermione's head snapped up. Malfoy was looking directly at her. There was a challenge in his eyes, daring her to say no. Scorpius would very much like to see those books Rose mentioned. He continued smoothly. "Perhaps we could meet in Hyde Park. It's neutral ground. Less crowded." He wasn't asking for a playdate. He was asking to see her again. Hermione's heart did a complicated, terrifying flip in her chest. "Hyde Park," she repeated. "Saturday." He confirmed. "At noon." She looked at him. She thought about her color-coded schedule. She thought about what the prophet would say. She thought about the feeling of his hand on her shoulder in the dark. "Saturday at noon," she agreed softly. Malfoy's mouth curved into a slow, devastating smile. "I'll see you then, Granger." He took Scorpius's hand. With a sharp crack, they separated. Hermione stood on the street corner for a long time, looking at the empty space where he had just been. She was smiling, and she couldn't seem to stop. Part 6. The rumor mill. The Daily Prophet landed on Draco's mahogany desk with a heavy, damning thud. He didn't need to read the headline. The moving photograph took up the entire front page. It had been taken 2 days ago in Hyde Park. In the background, Scorpius and Rose were chasing a flock of aggressive ducks. In the foreground, sitting on a weathered wooden bench, were Draco and Hermione. In the photograph, Hermione was laughing. Her head was thrown back, the autumn wind catching her wild, impossible hair. Draco was leaning toward her. He wasn't smiling, but the expression on his face was entirely unshielded. He was looking at her mouth with a singular, quiet intensity. It was intimate. It was undeniable. The headline screamed in bold, black ink, "The Golden Girl and the EX Death Eater, a secret alliance?" Draco looked at the paper. The muscle in his jaw feathered so violently his teeth ached. He didn't care about his own reputation. His reputation was already ashes. He cared about hers. He knew exactly what this would do to her. The whispers in the ministry. The political rivals who would use this to dismantle her career. He had spent the last 3 weeks letting himself believe this was possible. They had met for lunch. They had taken the children to the park. They had traded vicious, brilliant letters about magical theory via Al. He had let his guard down. And now she was going to pay the price. Draco stood up. He grabbed his cloak from the back of the chair and threw it over his shoulders. He needed to fix this. He needed to get to the ministry before the vultures tore her apart. The ministry atrium was always loud, but today, the noise had a different quality. It was a buzzing, electric hum. As soon as Draco stepped out of the flue, the whispers started. He ignored them. He smoothed his expression into a mask of pure, aristocratic boredom. He walked toward the lifts with slow, measured strides, looking straight ahead. He spotted her almost immediately. Granger was standing near the fountain of magical brethren. She wasn't alone. Harry Potter and Ron Weasley were flanking her. They formed a tight, protective triangle. Even from 50 feet away, Draco could read the tension in the set of their shoulders. Draco stopped. He stepped into the shadow of a large marble pillar. He couldn't hear every word over the noise of the atrium, but the acoustics carried enough. "It's a mistake, Hermione," Weasley was saying. His face was flushed red. "He's a Malfoy. He's playing some kind of game." "He isn't playing a game, Ron," Granger snapped back. "Then what is he doing?" Potter asked. His voice was quieter, but it carried the heavy, authoritative weight of the head aura. "Hermione, if he's threatening you, if he's using Rose to get to you, Harry, stop." Granger ran a hand through her hair. She looked exhausted. "He isn't threatening me. We're just spending time together. For the children. The children." Weasley repeated in disbelief. "Since when do you take Scorpius Malfoy to the park?" Draco watched her. She was surrounded by her people. The heroes. The people who had saved the world. He was the villain. He had always been the villain in their story. Granger looked away from them. Her hands were balled into fists at her sides. She looked stressed. She looked exactly the way she had in the Broom Closet, right before the panic broke her apart. "I am terrified my name is going to ruin him," Draco had told her in the dark. He wasn't just ruining Scorpius. He was ruining her. Weasley was right. It was a mistake. She was the ministry's brightest star, and he was dragging her into the mud. If she had to choose between her family, her career, and a few weeks of tentative banter with Draco Malfoy, he knew exactly how the math worked out. She would choose them. She had to choose them. Draco stepped out from behind the pillar. He didn't hesitate. He walked directly toward the golden trio. The crowd parted around him like water. Potter saw him first. The aura's hand dropped instantly toward his wand pocket. Weasley turned, his face darkening with anger. Granger looked up. When she saw him, her eyes softened. The defensive tension in her shoulders dropped by a fraction of an inch. She took a step toward him. Draco clamped down on the surge of affection in his chest. He locked it in a box and threw away the key. He stopped 5 feet away from them. He didn't look at Potter. He didn't look at Weasley. He looked directly at Granger, and he made sure his eyes were perfectly, terrifyingly blank. "Madam Granger," Draco said smoothly. The drawl was back, thick and impenetrable. Granger blinked. She stopped moving. Draco? The use of his first name made Weasley flinch. Draco ignored it. I saw the prophet this morning, he continued, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. A regrettable breach of privacy. I assume your office is currently managing the fallout. Granger looked at him. The softness in her eyes was replaced by confusion. We were just talking about that. It's fine. I am here to offer my apologies. Draco interrupted smoothly. And to assure you that it will not happen again. The confusion on her face deepened. What do you mean? I mean, Draco said, every word tasting like ash, that we should suspend any future arrangements regarding the children. It was a temporary alliance born of necessity, but it has clearly outlived its usefulness. I have no desire to be the subject of ministry gossip, and I'm sure you have a career to protect. Weasley looked vindicated. Potter looked suspicious. Granger looked like he had just slapped her. Outlived its usefulness? She repeated. Her voice was barely a whisper. Draco forced himself to maintain eye contact. He couldn't let her see the lie. If he softened, if he gave her an inch, she would fight for him. And she couldn't fight for him. She had to let him go. Indeed. Draco said coldly. Scorpius enjoyed the playdates, but his schedule is becoming rather full. I trust you can explain it to your daughter. Granger's hands were shaking. She wasn't vibrating with anger. She was absolutely perfectly still. It was her tell. She was terrified, and she was hurt. Don't do this, a voice screamed in Draco's head. Tell them to go to hell. Take her hand. Instead, he gave a short, formal bow. Good day, Madam Granger. Potter. Weasley. He didn't wait for a response. He turned on his heel and walked toward the lifts. He felt her eyes on his back with every step he took. The distance between them stretched, pulling the fragile connection tight until it snapped completely. The lift doors opened. Draco stepped inside. He turned around just in time to see Granger standing by the fountain, watching him. She wasn't crying, but she looked completely shattered. The gold grills slid shut, cutting her off from view. Draco leaned back against the cool metal of the lift wall. He closed his eyes. He had done the right thing. He had protected her. So why did it feel exactly like dying? Part 7. The Retreat. Mum? Hermione looked up from the mountain of parchment on her kitchen table. Yes, Rosie? Rose was sitting on the floor, meticulously lining up her collection of chocolate frog cards. Is Scorpius coming to the park today? Hermione's chest seized. It was a sharp, physical ache that had been sitting behind her ribs for 4 days. No, sweetheart, Hermione said gently. She forced her voice to stay perfectly level. Scorpius is very busy today, and we have errands to run. Rose frowned. She placed a card featuring Albus Dumbledore next to one of Morgana. But he said he wanted to see my new broom. He promised. I know, Hermione whispered. I'm sorry. She turned back to the parchment, but the words were swimming. It had been 4 days since the incident in the ministry atrium. For days since Draco Malfoy had looked at her with eyes like shattered ice and told her their arrangement had outlived its usefulness. It made no sense. Hermione was the brightest witch of her age. She understood logic. She understood patterns. The Draco Malfoy who had poured her tea and remembered she didn't take sugar was not the same Draco Malfoy who had coldly dismissed her in front of Harry and Ron. One of them was a lie. She just didn't know which one. She packed away her work and took Rose to Diagon Alley. It was a mistake. The whispers followed her everywhere. Witches nudged each other in flourish and blots. A wizard at the apothecary outright pointed at her. The Daily Prophet was still running the story on page 3. They were speculating about love potions, blackmail, and political corruption. Hermione ignored them. She kept her chin high. She bought Rose her school supplies, smiled at the shopkeepers, and projected an aura of complete, unbothered competence. By the time she dropped Rose off at the Burrow for the afternoon and arrived at her ministry office, she was exhausted. She closed her office door and leaned against the wood. She missed him. The realization was infuriating. It was illogical. They had spent barely 3 weeks in each other's orbit. They were practically strangers. But she missed the sharp, demanding cadence of his owls. She missed the way he stood in a crowd, always angling his body to shield hers. She missed the quiet, devastating honesty he kept hidden behind his drawl. A knock on the door startled her. "Come in." She called out, moving quickly behind her desk. Harry walked in. He looked tired. He shut the door behind him and cast a quiet muffliato charm. "Harry," Hermione said cautiously. They hadn't really spoken since the atrium. Ron had sent her 3 howling owls about the importance of family loyalty, but Harry had been completely silent. "I'm not here to yell at you," Harry said. He sat down in the chair opposite her desk. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm here to apologize." Hermione blinked. "Apologize for what?" "For ambushing you. For cornering you in public when the press was already circling." Harry looked at her, his green eyes entirely serious. It was stupid. And it forced his hand. Hermione froze. Her pen stopped hovering over her inkwell. Whose hand? Malfoy's. He didn't force anything, Harry. He made his position perfectly clear. Did he? Harry asked quietly. Yes. He said our arrangement had outlived its usefulness. The words still burned, acidic and cruel on her tongue. Hermione. Harry sighed. I've spent a decade hunting dark wizards. I know what a threat looks like. I know what a man looks like when he's trying to manipulate a situation. And Malfoy didn't look like he was manipulating anyone. Harry leaned forward. When he walked up to us, he didn't look at me or Ron. He only looked at you. And when he said he was suspending the playdates, Harry shook his head. He looked like he was walking to his own execution. Hermione's breath caught. Ron thinks it was a power play, Harry continued. But I think he saw us backing you into a corner, and he knew the Prophet was going to ruin you if he didn't give you an out. So he gave you an out. He played the villain so you wouldn't have to. Hermione went completely, terrifyingly still. The frantic, bustling energy of her office vanished. The noise of the ministry outside her door faded into nothing. She remembered the cramped, dark space of the Broom Closet. She remembered the smell of lemon cleaner and expensive wool. She remembered the absolute terror in his voice. I spend every waking moment terrified that my name is going to ruin him before he even gets a chance to try. He wasn't just talking about Scorpius. He was talking about her. The realization hit her with the force of a bludger to the chest. He hadn't walked away because he was bored. He hadn't walked away because he didn't care. He had walked away because he cared entirely too much. He thought his name, his history, the dark mark faded on his arm, was going to destroy everything she had built. He had broken his own heart, and hers, just to protect her career. It was the most selfless, arrogant, deeply idiotic thing anyone had ever done for her. Hermione? Harry asked, watching her closely. Are you all right? He's an idiot, Hermione whispered. Who? Ron? Malfoy. Hermione stood up. The stillness broke, replaced by a sudden, fierce rush of adrenaline. She grabbed her coat from the back of her chair. She grabbed her beaded bag. He is an absolute, unbelievable idiot, she repeated, her voice rising in volume. He thinks he can just make my decisions for me. He thinks he can just throw himself on his sword and walk away. Harry leaned back in his chair. A slow smile spread across his face. Where are you going? I'm going to Malfoy Manor, Hermione declared. She shoved her wand into her pocket. I'm going to find Draco Malfoy, and I'm going to explain to him exactly how wrong he is. Do you want backup? Harry offered, though he looked highly amused. I don't need backup. I need him to stop being a martyr. She marched past Harry and threw the door open. Her assistant, a nervous young wizard named Perkins, jumped out of his chair in the outer office. Madam Granger, you have a meeting with the Department of Magical Games and Sports in 10 minutes. Cancel it, Hermione ordered, not breaking her stride. But cancel everything, Perkins. I am taking the rest of the afternoon off. Is there an emergency? Perkins squeaked. Hermione stopped at the door leading to the main corridor. She looked back at her assistant. The fear and the hesitation that had plagued her for the last 4 days were completely gone. Yes, she said fiercely. There is an emergency. She didn't care about the Daily Prophet. She didn't care about the whispers in the atrium. She didn't care about the political forelight. She only cared about the man who had poured her tea and remembered she didn't take sugar. The man who had shielded her from a panicked crowd. The man who was currently sitting in a cold manor, convinced he was a villain. She was going to bring him back. Part 8. The grand gesture. Draco Malfoy was sitting in the dark, drinking a glass of 300-year-old Dens, and actively hating his life. The fire in his study had burned down to embers. The rest of the manor was perfectly, oppressively quiet. Scorpius was asleep in the West Wing, having refused to speak to Draco for 3 days after being told that the playdates with Rose Weasley were permanently cancelled. Draco took another swallow of the fire whiskey. It burned beautifully all the way down. It had been 4 days since he walked away from Hermione Granger in the Ministry atrium. 4 days of avoiding the Daily Prophet. 4 days of waking up and instinctively reaching for an owl that wasn't coming. He had done the right thing. He repeated the phrase to himself like a mantra. I protected her. The wards at the edge of the property chimed. Draco frowned, setting his glass down on the heavy oak desk. The manor wards rarely chimed. Only a handful of people were keyed into them, and none of them visited at 4 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Before he could stand up to check the perimeter, the heavy double doors of his study burst open. Draco had his wand in his hand and a hex on his tongue before he even registered who it was. Hermione Granger was standing in the doorway. She was breathing heavily, as if she had sprinted up the mile-long driveway. Her coat was unbuttoned, her hair was a magnificent, chaotic halo around her face, and her wand was gripped tightly in her right hand. She looked absolutely terrifying. Draco lowered his wand. His heart slammed into his ribs so hard it physically hurt. He immediately reached for the mask. He smoothed his features into an expression of cool, detached surprise. "Madam Granger," Draco said, his voice a slow, aristocratic drawl. "To what do I owe this unprecedented shut-up?" Draco blinked. The drawl vanished. "Excuse me?" Hermione stepped into the study and slammed the doors shut behind her. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. She marched across the antique Persian rug until she was standing directly in front of his desk. She didn't look like a politician. She looked like a general preparing for war. "You do not get to do that," she said, her voice shaking with barely suppressed fury. "You do not get to make decisions for me, Draco Malfoy." Draco stood up. He kept the desk between them, a desperate, pathetic barricade. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Liar," she snapped. "You saw Harry and Ron boxing me in. You saw the press circling. And instead of standing there and letting me handle it, you threw yourself on your sword. I was ending an arrangement that was no longer beneficial. Stop lying to me." Hermione slammed both hands down on his desk. The crystal decanter rattled. "You told me, in that broom closet, that you were terrified your name would ruin Scorpius. You think your name is going to ruin me, too." Draco stopped breathing. The mask cracked. He couldn't hold it. Not when she was standing there, looking at him with those fierce, impossibly warm brown eyes. "It will ruin you," he said. His voice wasn't a drawl anymore. It was raw and quiet. "You are the brightest witch of our age. You are going to be Minister for Magic. I am a former Death Eater with a cursed name and a ruined reputation. The Prophet is already trying to tear you down just for sitting on a bench with me. I don't care about the Prophet. You should." "Well, I don't." She stepped around the desk. Draco instinctively took a step back, hitting the edge of the bookshelves. Hermione kept coming. She didn't stop until she was less than a foot away from him. The scent of her parchment, vanilla, and rain was entirely overwhelming. "I don't care about the ministry," Hermione said, looking up at him. "I don't care about the whispers. I survived a war, Draco. A few nasty articles by Rita Skeeter are not going to break me." "Hermione, I am not finished." She poked him hard in the center of his chest. Draco actually gasped, more out of shock than pain. "You do not get to decide what I can handle," she continued fiercely, poking him again. "You do not get to decide that I am better off without you." "If I wanted to walk away, I would have walked away. I was trying to protect you," he said desperately. "I don't need protecting." She dropped her hand. The fury in her eyes gave way to something softer, something that looked dangerously like heartbreak. "I need you to stop running away," she whispered. Draco closed his eyes. The fight drained out of him, leaving him entirely hollowed out. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said, his voice rough. "I am not a good man, Hermione. I am selfish. I am difficult. And I come with a mountain of baggage. I know," she said simply. He opened his eyes. She was still there. She hadn't run. I also know, she continued softly, that you shielded me in a panicked crowd. I know that you poured my tea and remembered I didn't take sugar. I know that you love your son more than anything in the world. She reached up. Her fingers brushed against the line of his jaw. The touch was electric. It sent a shock of heat straight through his veins. Draco froze, terrified that if he moved, she would wake up and realize she was making a mistake. I like you, Draco, Hermione said. Her voice was steady and entirely sure. I like your ridiculous expensive suits. I like arguing with you. I like the way you look at me. Draco couldn't breathe. He looked at her, searching her face for any sign of hesitation, any sign of pity. There was only a terrifying, blindingly bright honesty. Are you sure? He asked. His voice broke on the final word. I'm always sure, she replied. Draco didn't think anymore. The logic, the fear, the years of carefully constructed walls, they all shattered. He reached out and pulled her in. His hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was desperate. It was years of hostility, weeks of tension, and 4 days of absolute agony crashing together in a single, heated moment. Hermione made a soft, breathless sound against his mouth. Her hands came up, tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer. She tasted like vanilla and adrenaline. Draco deepened the kiss, shifting his grip to her waist, lifting her slightly so she was flush against him. The heat between them flared, burning away the cold, oppressive shadows of the manor study. He had spent his entire life in the dark. She was the sun. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. Draco rested his forehead against hers. He kept his arms wrapped tightly around her waist, terrified she would disappear. Hermione's eyes were dark, her lips flushed. She traced the line of his cheekbone with her thumb. So, she whispered, a small, breathless smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. Does this mean the playdates are back on? A startled laugh ripped its way out of Draco's chest. It was a rusty, unused sound. Scorpius will be thrilled, Draco murmured, pressing a kiss to the corner of her mouth. He hasn't spoken to me in 3 days. He's a very smart boy. He takes after his father. Hermione laughed, a bright, beautiful sound that filled the room. She stepped back, though she didn't let go of his hand. Come on, she said, pulling him gently toward the study doors. Let's go tell him we're going to Hyde Park on Saturday. Draco looked down at their joined hands. The contrast of her skin against his, the warmth of her fingers, it felt like a lifeline. He tightened his grip. All right, Granger, he said softly. They walked out of the study together. The manor was still quiet, but it didn't feel oppressive anymore. It just felt like home. The end.